Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the Matrix. We've briefly paused our simulation series for a moment because we have to address the recent discoveries. We have come to the conclusion that Kohberger is guilty of those murders. Yes, we know it may come as a shock to many, but we've never investigated those murders to prove Kohberger was innocent. We investigated the murders to get to the truth. And in that journey, hours upon hours of brainstorming, contemplating who could be involved, why did this happen, why didn't this happen, so on and so on, we came to the conclusion that Kohberger had been framed. It's understandable due to the suspicions surrounding the case. For those who seem very flaky, think about all the hard work we've put in. I mean, look at these people. They flake so fast, right? Oh, I'm unsubscribing. This is bullshit. Oh, this has to be a joke. The Chaos channel has been hacked. Oh, you guys are full of shit. What the hell are you all bitching about? Do you know Brian Kohberger? Do you know where he was that night? No, you have no idea who he is. Neither does the Chaos. So why aren't you willing to accept the possibility that this man is guilty of those murders? Yeah, you could believe he is innocent, but you can't prove he is. And don't try to throw that back at the Chaos and saying, oh, well, you can't prove he's guilty. Listen, we've literally done everything possible. If we were Kohberger's defense team, there would have been a mistrial for sure, because everything we had exposed, questioned throughout our investigative work, would have led to the jury wondering if there were multiple killers that night. Yes, we've done the work. It was the Chaos who put the pressure on Dylan, exposed Bonnie and Clyde, exposed the suspicions surrounding the private driver, who we deemed as Batman, even the DoorDash driver. We exposed the suspicions surrounding Hunter, who we assumed took Xana out as she was the last one still alive, and he used the knife that night, and then they went over the story for the 911 call. I mean, damn, we've literally dug deep inside and yes, came to the conclusion Kohberger had been framed. But that audio tells a different story, my friends. It's devastating to one man who was in that home. Of course, many would say, oh, well, we don't know if that's Kohberger. Fair enough, there's no concrete proof that it's Kohberger, but it's concrete proof that there is a single man heard attacking a female in the home during a very quiet time in the neighborhood. And this man, who was driving a white vehicle, had been lurking in and out of that neighborhood that night, waiting for the right opportunity to creep into the home. And it came around 4:15 a.m. We all heard it. Let's not deny these facts. We see the vehicle come back. We hear the car door shut. This is the man getting out of the car, if you're not following. We hear Murphy bark momentarily as there is movement in that home, which Murphy may have detected an intruder. We hear a female running away from this intruder. We hear a single man, yes, one man, chasing her, attacking her brutally, and even spoke to her. Yes, we hear this man's voice. We don't hear a gang of drug cartel members coming into the home to send a message to those housemates for fucking up their money. No, there is only one man who had been driving around in that neighborhood, lurking, waiting, and then attacked. Moments later, this man speeds off. Yes, he has just murdered individuals in the 1122 King Road residence, and now he's fleeing the scene before someone spots him. Can anyone deny the physical evidence of one man who drove a white vehicle going into that home and murdering a female? You can't. We've all heard it. Sure, there's a bit of suspicion surrounding prior timeframes, such as that 2:25 a.m. timeframe where there are females heard screaming, but does it really sound like it's coming from 11:22? Comparing both timeframes, those females screaming doesn't indicate murders are taking place. Why? Because those screams would be far more consistent, meaning we would also hear the running, bamming noises and such, the same thing we heard at 4:17 a.m. Now that is definitely coming from 11:22. Facts. There is a man who came into the neighborhood and committed murders, then speeds off. That is a fucking fact. We heard the massacre in real time. Speculation, the murders were taking place around 2 a.m. as the females are heard screaming. This is not a fact. It is speculation. If it were just that audio of those females heard screaming without that 4:17 a.m. time frame, then yes, the chaos would assume also that the murders had taken place during that 2 a.m. hour. But man, the disturbing audio of... it's sad. And all of you have the nerve to ignore it? Like, come on. There's one man in that home who was driving the very vehicle that was snooping around in the neighborhood earlier. See, you guys have grown into a mob where you've conditioned yourselves to think Kohberger had been framed. Maybe the chaos is to blame for some of that, sure. We didn't intend on that being the outcome, but you have to be willing to accept the facts, or at least the high probability Kohberger is guilty. We haven't been hacked. We're not betraying Kohberger. What, do we look like his fucking defense attorney? We have no personal interest in defending him. That's not what investigating is about. We've presented poll questions, and it seems everyone is in a state of denial.
If you say yes 100% of the time, you're praised. But if you say yes 99% of the time you said no is all that matters. You become an enemy. How quick people switch on you. This is why we don't really embrace any communities on YouTube, because it's very fickle. As soon as these mobs of people don't get what they want out of you, you're immediately an adversary. But ask these same individuals, what investigative work have they done over the course of this case? Nothing. Yet they have the loudest voices? Something's off with this picture, my friends. Now let's just briefly look at the polls we put up. Found it quite interesting. Quote, the chaos has to ask a serious question to see if everyone is honest or just looking for thrills in the true crime community. A question. At 4:17 a.m., is there only one male heard in that home attacking a female? 16% said yes, but there's no proof it was Kohberger. 16% said at that point, but there were other people there around 2:25 a.m. And 68% said, no, I heard other males in the home. Listen closer. Now, this is a bit ridiculous, to be honest. 68% said they heard other males in the home at 4:17 a.m. We listened very carefully, my friends, and there is only one male heard. This seems to be a case of just rebelling against the chaos due to our recent theory, and that's not being intellectually honest. Heck, it's not being genuine altogether. The 16% that said yes, there was one male's voice heard, we give them credit, because they at least have the courage to just admit it. Then we had another poll. Quote, here's another question for some of these individuals. Which time frame proves murders occurred? 16% said 2:25 a.m., there were females heard screaming from 11:22, allegedly. 6% said 4:17 a.m., the female heard screaming from 11:22, confirmed, and 78% said both. There were different time frames of the murders. Now, let's address the claim of it being confirmed the murders occurred at 4:17 a.m., as someone asked, how is that confirmed? Well, are you denying what your ears heard and what your eyes saw from that security footage? Oh, how do you know it's coming from 11:22? That's speculation. No, it's not. We hear a female running for her life. She is attacked. God damn it. She is either slammed on the ground or collapses. A male is heard speaking to her, and if you listen closely, it even sounded like he punched her. Starting to piss the chaos off now, because you all are literally denying what you were hearing in that audio. Fucking bullshit. And to suggest there were different time frames of the murders? Okay, well, apparently one male came back to murder someone then, right? It's not the same person who had murdered other housemates around 2:25 a.m., because if it were, driving that white vehicle, Moscow PD would gladly release that to Jules. Hey, here you go. There's Kohberger for you. In fact, let's elaborate on this theory. So let's say two of the housemates were murdered around 2 a.m. Then hours later, a vehicle who had been lurking around, hey, it's my turn. I have targets in the home too. But wait, there are other housemates who are already deceased when he gets there. Surely he would be like, oh shit, not sure if I want to attempt this. Perhaps the cops were called. Let me get the fuck out of here. I'll come back months later. You see?
It doesn't make sense, regardless if it's Kohberger or not in that scenario. Grasping for straws to prove Kohberger isn't the killer. You should not be doing that. The chaos earned the right to present a theory that Kohberger had been framed. We literally dissected key elements of Moscow PD's investigation. Things didn't add up. But just because it was a growing theory that he was framed does not mean you should become hardwired into thinking it's impossible for him to be guilty. We've never done that. In fact, early on, Okay, let's walk these individuals through the process.
Wait, there's no need. It will only frustrate you more. Someone mentioned Cyray's testimony, which places Kohberger southwest of Moscow, right? Well, he never claimed Kohberger was stationary being southwest of Moscow, and never provided this stationary time southwest of Moscow during the time frame the vehicle arrives in the neighborhood, nor during and after the attacks. So it's not exculpatory evidence. Yeah, we pointed that out as well, as it would place Kohberger somewhere else during the murders. But it was never stated that Kohberger was literally physically somewhere else during the murders. He was just detected in that area at some point. You see, things are starting to unfold, and all of the elements we all considered used to frame Kohberger, honestly, they're starting to align themselves as being justified. I know, it may sound shocking, but again, the lack of an alibi. Let's go over this one more time. Now, we did examine the path Kohberger could have taken to get to Moscow, and Taylor requests surveillance footage showing Kohberger entering Moscow. Well, he didn't enter from the northern state line on Highway 270. Nah, that's too risky, as there are tons of traffic cameras that would spot him. He entered through guess what, the southern state line. Yep, and this is why his phone was pinging in the southwestern region away from Moscow. Cyray stated that the towers in Pullman are smaller and more congested, right? And that the tower in the mountainous region is larger and covers a larger area. This is the tower that Kohberger's phone pinged on, which temporarily, yes, temporarily places him southwest of Moscow. But this is not an alibi if Cyray can't prove that Kohberger's phone was in that area during the murders. And that is the problem. Without that physical proof of Kohberger's location, the judge doesn't know where he was during the murders. Mind you, they already have a trace of his DNA on a knife sheath, at least from their perspective, and a white vehicle that matches the description of his vehicle is seen in and out of the neighborhood prior to the murders. And then, of course, with this audio of the massacre taking place around 4:17 a.m., how can Ann Taylor prove Kohberger wasn't there without an alibi that has him literally southwest of Moscow during the murders? You can't. It's that simple. It would be different if he actually had an alibi, and then we would be right where we left off, exposing the frame job. Quote, "Your Honor, my client has proof that he was not in that neighborhood the night of the murders, nor was he in Moscow the night of the murders. I present Exhibit A. Here we see photos taken at the Wawa Park, timed at 3:37 a.m. Sunday morning. As we see, he's at the park with a few of his friends. Seems they're having a good time to me. It's physically impossible for Kohberger to teleport to that neighborhood and commit those murders. In addition, here are text messages prior to these hangouts. We see Kohberger is texting his friend about going to the park. The time is 2:25 a.m. His evening consists of doing a bit of shopping, he spoke to his parents about his upcoming break, and then he took a nap after going over school papers. So I don't know how his DNA got in that home, but my client was not there. He doesn't know the victims, and I ask that this case be dismissed." Unquote. Yep, it would be a frame job for the entire nation to witness. But as we know, Ann Taylor could only say her client doesn't have a connection to those housemates. Yeah, like a guy that's stalking them would tell his defense attorney that. You see how it's all unraveling? We're not fucking around here. We put the work in to get to the bottom of this shit.
Yep. Hey, let's reiterate that point for a moment because, as we pointed out, Ann Taylor was dragging her feet in this case, and we see why. Ann Taylor claimed that Kohberger had no connection to those victims. Heck, even the prosecution claimed there wasn't a connection to the victims, right? Now, at face value, this indicates there is no motive, but not so fast. What evidence would Kohberger have that would be collected upon searching his vehicle, his apartment, and all of his belongings? Do you think he would keep anything that links him to the murders? Of course not. So obviously there wouldn't be a connection to the victims, you see? He was slick, but not slick enough. He needed more WD-40. Again, he would tell his defense attorney, "Hey, I don't know those victims. I've never even been in that neighborhood." Now, Ann Taylor may have assumed he was telling the truth early on, but when that plea deal came about, it was due to the surveillance footage being released and, of course, the audio of the murders occurring at 4:17 a.m. Her client doesn't have an alibi, his DNA was discovered on a knife sheath in one of the victim's bedroom, his vehicle matches the description of suspect vehicle number 1, and he purchased the very weapon claimed to have been used against those victims months prior. How can she prove he is innocent? Impossible. So at some point she said to herself, well, there's not enough evidence and information I can utilize to create a reasonable doubt. I mean, the futile attempt to suggest Kohberger couldn't have committed the murders because he has autism, what the hell? And the chaos criticized the defense for even mentioning that, because it was a cunning way for the defense to concede that yes, he committed the murders, but he isn't, well, all the way there, so we should have the death penalty taken off the table. It was all right in front of our faces. He would have done better by just pleading insanity. At least it's true, he's insane. She tried the alternate suspects angle, but here's the problem with it. Even though, again, at face value, it causes conflict. At the time of the murders, which are reported to have happened between 4 to 4:25 a.m., is there anyone else seen in that surveillance snooping around? Is there any of those males' DNA discovered that you hear in that home? No. This is what the chaos thinks about that. It was bogus. It was claimed at the time, early on in the investigation, to throw Kohberger off while they tracked him down. And of course, when he was arrested, he asked if anyone else was arrested. Does everyone remember those traffic stops on the highway heading to Pennsylvania? They didn't know for sure he was the killer, but suspected him. And this makes the chaos wonder if guess who, WSU Kim, had tipped the FBI off about Kohberger. If anyone recalls, she claimed she called the FBI later Sunday evening. She claimed that Kohberger had been in that house before. So someone knew he was the primary suspect due to be deemed a, quote, creeper in that home who was told to leave. When the murders occurred, he became the primary suspect due to his creepiness. Law enforcement didn't know this, but that college circle knew, or at least suspected him. And now that would look back, Kaylee complaining about being stalked and someone had been in that home prior, all seems to lead to Kohberger. Now that may sound like a reach, but if there were multiple killers in that home, then we have two isolated settings where Dylan and Bethany experienced other housemates being murdered, and then hours later, more housemates were murdered. Let's make sure we clarify this. If there weren't a white vehicle snooping around and one male, yes, one male, heard attacking a female around 4:17 a.m., murdering her, then we hear this man get into his vehicle and it's the same vehicle speeding off around 4:20 a.m., without this evidence, then perhaps, yeah, there were two different time frames of the murders. But because this evidence exists, then it's one male who had murdered 4 victims. Bullshit, he couldn't have done that within a few minutes. He entered the home around 4:15 a.m. and was out of there about 3 to 4 minutes later. That's like 20 to 30 seconds per victim. Get the fuck out of here. But is it impossible, considering Kohberger knows exactly where he's going, knows exactly where the targets are in the home, watched the home enough to see that they're going to sleep, may have even timed when they went to sleep on average? Now, many assumed there were multiple weapons used based on the description of the injuries. Sharp, blunt force? Edged weapon? Yeah, it sounds like different weapons. But if that K-bar was used with such force aggressively on some victims, but not as forceful with others, the injuries or how the tissue reacted to that force will be different. It doesn't necessarily mean there was a different weapon used. Rather, the weapon was used differently. Yet again, we're going to just keep focusing on the audio at 4:17 a.m. Do we have to play that audio for you guys to accept the truth? I mean, come on. We can all suggest that it doesn't prove that it's Kohberger driving in that vehicle and goes on to commit the murders, and just because there's one male heard in that home doesn't prove it's Kohberger. But the chaos listened to that male's voice very carefully. Yes, we literally envisioned that setting, and the calm and reserved tone of that male's voice sounds like the soft-spoken Kohberger. Just listen to some of his traffic stops. Listen to how soft-spoken he is. But nevertheless, who would have been murdered around 2:25 a.m. when there were females heard screaming? We're asking you guys, which victims would this be since you claim the murders occurred earlier? Is this Kaylee and Madison or Zana and Ethan? Well, why would there be different time frames of the murders if there were multiple killers? They'd just come in all at once and get rid of them all together. Again, why would the killer coming in to finish the other targets off risk the possibility of there being cops and paramedics in the neighborhood as there were 2 housemates discovered? Okay, that's enough.
Well, that's an honest take, my friends. We all can't accept the fact that the federal government is corrupt. Moscow PD and the state performed an unlawful investigation and even violated a few rights here and there of the defendant. But the chaos will not ignore that male in the home attacking one of the victims. It's evidence of the murders in that home. Yes, in that home. All of the screaming, all of the noise, all of the suspicious activity in certain time frames, even allegedly hearing Ethan's name in the Linda Lane audio, none of this is concrete evidence that someone was murdered. But at 4:17 a.m., a female is heard screaming, trying to run away, and then attacked as the male speaks to her in her final moments alive. This appears to be Xana. Unless Moscow PD changed the time of this attack, then yes, Xana did order Jack in the Box. She was up and alive on TikTok. It would have to be Xana, my friends, because the time of departure was a few minutes later, which aligns with Dylan's accounts of seeing Kohberger walk past her and leave through the sliding doors. And, of course, we have to publicly apologize to Dylan. Yes, she's not an angel, but now with this audio, we have to assume she had nothing to do with those murders. I know, the chaos was hardwired in exposing Dylan. Throughout the years of investigating, we felt she was an accessory to those murders. But now it seems she was simply frightened that night. Of course, we have the issue regarding the delay of the 911 call, yet this doesn't prove they were involved in the murders, to be honest. It seemed suspicious early on, but again, with this audio and the terror she must have felt in experiencing that nightmare, fear causes you to freeze up. You have deceased housemates in the home, which is perhaps even more frightening to be around. So yeah, she ran down to Bethany's room. They locked themselves in and hoped that the killer wouldn't return for them. That's fear. Well, why wouldn't they call 911 then? Here's the thing, let's just keep it real here. Are we focused more Dylan and Bethany waiting to call 911? Or are we focused more on Kohberger, which it definitely looks like he was the killer? The chaos is focused on Kohberger, my friends. See, it would be different if Kohberger had an alibi, you know? Hey man, I was driving around at night, but during the time frame those murders happened, I was with a few of my friends. Here, I have text messages. I have photos of me and my friends at the park hanging out. I know I have the same type of vehicle and color, but it wasn't me, Your Honor. Bingo, he's innocent, right? Yet he doesn't have this alibi, and without it, even if the state hasn't provided a motive, a connection to the victims, and only a trace of his DNA left on a knife sheath, a vehicle enters the neighborhood, parks. Moments later, a female is heard screaming, then attacked by a single male who we hear speaking to the victim. This is in Dylan's affidavit. She heard this. Of course, they're going to protect the surviving housemates. They're going to omit certain things. You know why? Because everyone would go crazy, just like they did, in criticizing them if they did include Dylan hearing screaming and running downstairs. So to avoid all of those distractions in their investigation, Moscow PD just left that out. The alibi, my friends, it's the lack of an alibi. Some would say, hey, sure, he doesn't have a strong alibi, and some would even suggest he doesn't actually have an alibi. But for those who still feel that Kohberger is innocent, then whose vehicle drives into the neighborhood several times from 3:30 to 4:15 a.m., parks the vehicle, Obviously, the male in the home attacking Xana has come to that home and then speeds off around 4:20, as if they had just witnessed something or had just done something. See, it's the audio. That's the problem. There is only one male heard in that home, and he's physically attacking a female. Come on, everyone, we all heard it. Never mind everything else. I know it causes you to doubt things. Yeah, the screams early on, the oddities in the case, but there is a lone male in that home, murdering those housemates. That is a damn fact. We all assumed it was impossible or highly unlikely for Kohberger to accomplish those murders, but listening to the audio, the setting in that home consists of housemates who were not prepared for such an ambush. He quietly walked upstairs and stabbed Madison as she slept. She woke up to her death. The DNA underneath her fingernails? Well, there's only one male heard, so it's not relevant. Kaylee awakens to this and is immediately punched in the face several times, basically pummeled based on the autopsy. This was Kohberger's main target out of the two of them, so he really did a number on her. Minimal noise was heard, perhaps a few desperate feints or moans, which got the attention of Murphy, who started barking. See, the initial barks were Murphy detecting a danger or suspicion in the home. Then Xana, awake, may have heard something or was just unfortunately targeted due to being up. Mind you, Kohberger would have seen her coming to the door for her delivery, so she was murdered based on being visible. She spots him, and this is when we hear her scream out, and is quickly slammed or stabbed to slow her down. Then she may have collapsed to the floor, and Kohberger goes on to stab her. And now the phrase, "It's okay, I'm gonna help you," it was to momentarily stop her from alarming anyone. At least that's what Kohberger thought in his panic. Then he goes into her room and murders Ethan in his sleep. Yeah, I know it seems unlikely, but if Xana hadn't made it to her room, as Kohberger is trying to keep her quiet, Ethan, well, may have literally been asleep when he was murdered, or at least he was severely injured, and this is where the slashes on his calves come into play, because the first few attacks on Ethan, he woke up and tried to get up, so Kohberger slashed his calves to prevent him from getting up, and the final blow was to just slash his throat, so he didn't risk him surviving. Yeah, this sounds highly unlikely, right? But do you hear Ethan struggling in that home with Kohberger? Do you hear another male yelling and screaming, loud banging noises as they wrestle with each other for the knife? No, we don't hear any of that. So yeah, Ethan wasn't murdered in his sleep, but he was asleep when he was attacked. Then all of the more fatal injuries came afterwards. Mind you, Xana is already deceased. Kaylee and Madison are deceased. Kohberger just needs to finish Ethan off, and he's out of there within 10 minutes.
Hold on, let's make sure everyone is truly grasping this setting. For those who claim that Kohberger couldn't have murdered 4 housemates in less than 10 minutes, the audio from that security camera next door is literally displaying how it's possible. Again, we'll just keep drilling this into your heads, just accept it at this point. A vehicle is spotted entering the neighborhood at 3:30 a.m. The vehicle obviously is not a resident, okay? The vehicle comes back several times, lurking around. So before I go any further, can you all agree that this vehicle is suspect number 1? I'm assuming you would. Now, the same vehicle enters the neighborhood again at 4:15 a.m., only this time it has parked. We hear the car door shut. You heard it. Don't act like you didn't hear the fucking car door shut. The vehicle is parked on the extension of Queen Road alongside the victim's home. Moments later, a female is heard yelling, frightened, running away from danger. You fucking heard it, and it's pissing the chaos off that you all are ignoring that audio. That is one of the housemates being murdered. Have you forgotten why everyone is investigating this case? Huh? Let me calm down a bit before the chaos meter reaches the max. Listen, there is a male heard in that home chasing what sounds like Xana on the second floor. He fucking attacks her and is even talking to her while he attacks. Doesn't this anger you all? To hear the victim pleading for her life against this man? Oh no, you're denying what you hear and too busy attacking the chaos. The man leaves the home as Murphy barks, gets in his vehicle, and speeds away. We see it. We all see it. He is speeding away from the murder scene. Do you accept the fact that this vehicle is the same man in that home? Answer me, damn it! How dare you attack the chaos after all we've done? Half of you wouldn't even believe Kohberger was framed in the first fucking place if it weren't for the chaos. Yes, we were one of the first to immediately assume he was framed, but things change, okay? The audio, combined with that white vehicle, we know it's one man in that home. And if it were one man from Moscow, he wouldn't have attacked in that manner because he would be hunted down quite fast. This was someone who wasn't from Moscow and knew they could leave town, making it hard for law enforcement to track them down. Heck, by the time they did get a lead, he'd be all the way in Pennsylvania for the holidays. Did Ann Taylor deny the evidence that Kohberger made that purchase for a K-bar knife? No, it stood as supplemental evidence against the defendant. It is the purchase of the murder weapon used that night. Taylor never came out and flat out said, "My client has been framed for the murders." That's the conclusion, right? No need to file motion after motion requesting this and that. Fuck that. My client said he wasn't in that neighborhood that night, doesn't know the victims, and he doesn't know how his DNA got in that home. Okay, can you prove that your client wasn't there that night during the time of the murders? Your Honor, it's complicated. How is it complicated? Either he was there or he wasn't. Surely your client has some form of evidence to establish an alibi, right? No, Your Honor. Well, how the hell can you claim your client wasn't there that night if you can't prove it? She racked in her dough for intentionally dragging the case on, sitting there knowing her client was guilty. Oh well, I'm not winning this case, but at least I can rack in the dough. In fact, Taylor is from the state of Idaho as well. Surely she may have felt a way about Kohberger too. Yeah, we understand all of the other elements of the case. Whose blood DNA is on the stair rail, I See You Farley, Bonnie and Clyde, the fraternities and sororities, all of the suspicious behavior from Showalter, In on Harsh, we can go down the list. But what cannot be refuted, what cannot be denied, is there was one man in that home murdering a female. And with that one man heard, all of the aforementioned suspicious elements take a back seat. That's just the facts, my friends. Sorry for the rant to all the genuine supporters. They understand that time reveals all truth.
No problem. That was needed. We've investigated, all right? We've looked at pretty much every possible scenario. We never dug into all of the college peers extensively. We've never dug into the Reddit posts, Facebook, TikTok. That's not our style to go following trails of uncertainty. We focused on the crime scene, who was the accused, and the survivors. That's how we started our investigation into the case. And to this day, one thing hasn't been provided by the defendant: an alibi. There wasn't exculpatory evidence because it would have been revealed by now. It was Ann Taylor and her defense team leading the defendant on, thinking he would get away with the crime, but also to keep racking in the dough in defending someone she knew was guilty. Oh, what about Zaina's mom being an informant? What about Bonnie's father being a drug lord? What about this and what about that? Yeah, these are human beings. We're simply looking into the lives of people we otherwise wouldn't know about. So everything is subject to scrutiny and suspicions. Oh, this was a cartel hit on the children of parents who snitched. Logical, but logic doesn't mean it's a fact. What's a fact is there is a man driving a white vehicle who had entered that home, murdered a female, and then got back in his car and drives off, heading west onto Walenta Drive, meaning the man decided to take a route away from main roads. Seems this man knew he would be spotted by traffic cameras on the main roads, so he avoided them, and Walenta Drive turns to Ridge Road. And from there, you connect with Palouse River Drive. And that, my friends, is a path towards the southern state lines, the same way the man arrived in Moscow. Who is this man? Clearly, it's a lone killer, right? Yep. We're tired, okay? I don't think people realize how exhausting it is to take an investigative journey. It requires hours and hours of thinking. Yes, critical thinking. The same thinking that some of you have complimented the chaos for using. And we're using those critical thinking skills once again. But now the Kohberger mob is after us? Come on.
The vehicle appears to be white, a sedan. It speeds off. The individual has just murdered those housemates and is now fleeing the crime scene quickly. It's so heartbreaking to hear the female being attacked, you know? Just, it fucking angers the chaos to hear that. In the years of investigating this murder case and believing Kohberger was framed, one segment of audio changed everything. He's guilty, my friends. We didn't believe it. Things didn't add up over the years, but that chilling audio pretty much proves it. What about the blood DNA left behind from another male? It's not even relevant anymore, to be honest. I guess that's why Bill Thompson said it, and we were all losing our shit with him saying that. But they listened to that audio, they reviewed the footage, and there was only one male in that home, attacking those housemates. No other male was heard. There wasn't a physical altercation heard at any point prior to when Kohberger was there, so the blood was irrelevant, because Kohberger murdered those housemates. We stand corrected, my friends, but we were always looking for the truth, and the truth hit us like a ton of bricks in that footage. This is the chaos sector.